Yet another 180-degree turn. That seems kind of to be the theme here, because we see magical 180-degree turns from giant cargo ships, and then back here on land we see them from spokesmen and people that are supposedly telling us the truth about what happened to the USS Fitzgerald. I remember specifically in the press conference from 7th Fleet Admiral O'Coin that he said unequivocally that the U.S. Navy would cooperate fully with the investigation going on by multiple different agencies. Yet, they're not going to allow Japanese investigators to speak with anybody who was actually aboard the ship. Really? Let's just go through a couple things in this article. The United States will likely bar Japanese investigators from interviewing USS Fitzgerald crew manning the guided missile destroyer when it was struck by a cargo ship in Japanese waters, killing 7 American sailors. Now we know the details here. At least 6 investigations are being carried out, 2 U.S. Navy internal hearings, one by the Coast Guard, Philippines government, and something going on with Japan as well. The U.S. Coast Guard, which is investigating on behalf of the National Transportation Safety Board, has interviewed the crew of the container ship. But the U.S. Navy official who declined to be identified said warships were afforded sovereign immunity under international law and foreign investigators were not expected to get access to the U.S. crew. Quote, "It is unlikely Japanese or Philippine authorities will have direct access to crew members," said the U.S. official. People have come to the videos and reminded me that we should be dealing with things that are official, so there you go. The U.S. Coast Guard would instead provide summaries of crew interviews to the Japan Transport Safety Board, which would share them with the Japanese Coast Guard. Declining access may be viewed by Japanese investigators as falling short of a pledge made by 7th Fleet Commander Vice Admiral Joseph P. O'Coin of full cooperation in the investigation. So, basically, folks, this is yet another smoking gun. This is the nail in the coffin, whatever analogy you want to use, that the U.S. Navy believes that if actual investigators got a hold of this crew and they started asking questions much like perhaps are being asked here at the channel, that the actual truth might come to light. Because what if, seriously, if this was just an accident, it was an unfortunate accident, why not? Why not let all those sailors and petty officers go and be interviewed? Perhaps we can glean something for the future to prevent tragic accidents like this from happening again. It's a bunch of crap, folks. You know it. I know it. Everybody at the channel knows it. Now, I had another conversation with someone in my life, family member, who spent 30 years in the Navy. And I was speaking with him about this issue with collision alert versus general quarters. The idea of general quarters is you always assume the worst until you get information to the contrary about events like this, which makes good sense. That's good military thinking from anybody who's any branch of the service, Marines, Air Force, Navy, Army. So let's go ahead and just focus this down to that 1:30 time. Now, the story from the Navy is that operations up until the time of the collision were normal. That's their word, not mine. The captain, reportedly, at the time of the collision at 01:30, was asleep in his quarters. What can we glean from that? That means that if that's the case, and he was in his quarters at 1:30 when the boat hit the other boat, the watch crew of the Fitzgerald was completely unaware of the presence of the freighter. 2 minutes before, even though it would have been only a matter of a few feet away, could have thrown a stone and hit it, unaware. Because even at 5 minutes before the collision, if someone had been aware of that giant freighter bearing down on them, that captain would have not been in his quarters. Somebody would have physically gone there and rousted him out. And he wouldn't have been there, but he was, according to all accounts, in his quarters at the time of the collision, and the time of the collision, according to all accounts, was 1:30. So, given that we can now establish, based on the thinking from the Navy, the story from the Navy, is that everything was fine, nobody was aware of anything, and then this giant traumatic event. Below the waterline, the ship is punctured. What was the word the admiral used? Traumatic? The comms go down because the communication room is destroyed. Giant shockwave gets sent through the entire ship. And nobody knows whether it's a collision, nobody knows whether it's a missile or a torpedo or a bomb. Nobody knows. Nobody would have known, according to the story from the Navy. Ergo, what would training dictate the crew do? Sound general quarters. And we can confirm that because when we listen to the collision audio from the bridge of the USS Porter, Straits of Hormuz, middle of the day, completely aware of their surroundings, moving at 5 knots, they collide with the ship, and they sounded general quarters, and they were completely aware of the situation. So I think it is probably not a stretch to say that if we can follow the logic of the U.S. Navy, based on the things they've said, not what the channel's saying, that general quarters would have been sounded within 60 seconds of the collision. Now, follow this, folks. During general quarters, everybody has an assigned place to be. Not everybody is damage control. Not everybody is going to man the guns. Everybody has an assigned job, an assigned duty, an assigned task. And then, based on the threat, the command crew will then move people around to different places to affect different results. Now, you had water coming in. You would have needed a damage control crew. You had lost communications. You would have needed a crew to deal with that. But somebody on that ship, a member of that command crew, more than likely, had their battle station include the duties of contacting the command authority. Somebody's battle station, somebody's job during that time was to establish communications with command and control and report what was going on. Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have been hit. Unknown. We are taking on water. We have lost communications. We are at battle stations. That would have been the reaction. And that's not some giant leap by the channel. That is what we saw on the Porter. And that's what is standard operating procedure. It would be necessarily. Because you can't say they knew. If you believe the Navy story that they didn't know, captain asleep in his bunk and nobody was aware, entire watch crew was apparently asleep or downstairs playing cards or whatever, that they didn't see it, because that's what the Navy is saying was the case. There would have been battle stations called, and somebody would have had the task of contacting 7th Fleet. Now, you may say, well, communications were down. They didn't have the ability to. No, wrong again. Because from the Navy, the report is that they were down to using sat phones to communicate, even on ship to ship. If they had a sat phone, somebody called headquarters. Somebody called 7th Fleet. There were 300 people aboard this ship, and each one of those 300 people had an assigned task. And I promise you, 299 of them weren't assigned to damage control. Somebody was assigned to contact command and control to request assistance, to request instructions. But we're also then supposed to believe, right out of the mouth, the words of the admiral, that the first people on the scene were well over an hour later, and it was the Japanese Coast Guard? You may not like me, you may not like the channel, you may not like the conjecture, but that line of logic is indisputable. That series of events, the two stories just don't add up. And this is probably why the U.S. is not going to let one single member of that crew be interviewed by anybody other than them. In another video, we covered another part of this, where there was the report that a mother relating what her son had told her, a sailor aboard, that he had continued to dive to search for his missing shipmates while, and this was the quote, others manned the guns because they believed they were under attack. So that thought process was prevalent aboard the ship, and necessarily it would have been. Because, we're armchair quarterback, we're, 2 weeks out, we're looking back at all this, but at that time, all they knew was giant traumatic event to the ship, it shuddered, water was coming in, and communications were down. There would have been no other assumption made other than it was attack. Even if somebody thought it may not have been, they had to err on the side of caution and get that ship ready for war. And part of that would have been somebody's job to take any and all possible means of contacting 7th Fleet. On top of that, there's comms redundancy. Even if that comms room was out, there was other ways of communicating. That's why the channel is maintaining that there's no way it happened at 1:30. Because even the Philippine crew, in their initial report, said it happened at 2:20. The Navy confirmed it happened at 2:20, and it was only after that Philippine crew got back to Japan and got under Japanese interrogation that they changed the story to 1:30. We've looked at the track. We've seen what happened at 1:30. It makes absolutely no sense from a logic standpoint or the standpoint of anybody who spent any amount of time at sea. What went on there? And I have yet to hear the Navy actually call this quote-unquote an accident. I've heard it described as a collision. I've heard it described as an incident, but not an accident. And we're 2 weeks out, and we still have very, very little information. But the little information we do have has pointed us in a very disturbing direction. But obviously not disturbing enough to the Japanese for them to hold the captain, because he's back in the Philippines. Did you know that? Yeah, he has been for quite some time, actually. Back on that southern island of the Philippines. Perfectly free to walk around, go wherever, do what he wants to do. Now, if you don't think that's suspicious, then I don't know. Thank you. We're going to leave that there and let you folks chew this over. Like, share, subscribe. Very much appreciate all of the likes and the comments. It's been a great conversation. We're going to continue to have it. Future videos, we're probably going to pick up some other theories and talk about them and see if they hold water. See what facts we can derive from these events and see what actually makes sense, what would agree with what has been reported. So anyway, like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. We will see you again next time.